Good morning, everyone. You are now live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual board meeting. As we continue to hold virtual meetings, there are a few housekeeping items. We're streaming the public portion of this meeting live on our YouTube channel. If we happen to experience any technical difficulties with the live stream, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube afterwards. To those who are in attendance, your microphone has been muted, and I ask that you put your hand up if you'd like to speak, and we'll retain a list of speaking requests as we go. Once you're called upon, please unmute yourself and proceed, and once you've completed, kindly mute yourself once again. As it relates to voting, please raise a hand to indicate your vote when a vote is called, and should you be disconnected from the video call, please rejoin using the link previously provided. With that, we will begin the Peel Police Services Board meeting of August 27th, 2021, and we'll begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and which the region of Peel operates as part of the treaty lands and territory of Mississauga of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee and Ojibwe-Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississauga of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. We'll begin by doing a roll call. I believe our member, Chair Nando Unica, won't be attending today, and Mayor Crombie will be late to the meeting, but we do have quorum, so we will continue. Thank you. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we will continue with the meeting. The next item on the agenda is the Chief's update. I'll now ask the Chief to provide the board with this update.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the board members. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to update you. On behalf of the service, all three deputies have a few brief updates, which I'd like to begin. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge that our service will be participating with the province on Monday for the announcement of an anti-human trafficking online program, which we hope will include Ministers Mulrooney, McKenna, Dunlop, and potentially the Premier. But as you know, Peel Regional Police has taken a lead role on a national level as it relates to human trafficking investigations and programming. So we're pleased to do that. I just wanted to flag that on Monday in Mississauga, we'll be able to showcase that. I know that some of the board members will be looking forward to attending. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Deputy Andrews, who, if he may, once concluded, will pass it on to Deputy Milinovich and then on to Deputy O'Doherty, and that should conclude our updates. Mark?
Thank you, Chief. Through the chair, good morning. I've got two relatively brief updates. The first one being an update on our Safer Roads teams. Road safety continues to be a priority for our community. And as a result, in April of 2021, the Safer Roads Teams, the SRT, was created by repurposing 16 existing positions to address road safety through a community safety and well-being lens. The unit focuses on data-driven risk intervention and prevention work. They focus on drivers that have repeatedly committed driving offenses that go beyond the regulatory offenses, but rather pose an imminent risk to our community. The SRT work closely with our frontline divisions and analysts, and they address the upstream and root causes. For example, they make referrals to drivers that have been charged with impaired driving to PARC, Peel Addiction Assessment and Referral Center. These referrals aim to connect drivers with addiction counselors to mitigate impaired driving related offenses. They also submit referrals to the Ministry of Transportation for drivers that have repeatedly been involved in dangerous driving behavior. The ministry reviews these referrals and assesses whether the drivers should be subjected to further road tests to sustain their driver's license. Disrupting and dismantling organized street racing is a focus of the SRT. And to that end, since April, the SRTs have laid over 350 stunt driving charges. This has led to a significant decrease in the calls for service for street racing in our region. The work of the SRT will continue as we move forward into the fall and winter driving season, where we usually see an increase in MVCs, MVCPIs. Subject to any questions, I'll move on to the second update. I don't want to steal the thunder here, but I'd like to foreshadow an upcoming presentation at the September PSB meeting in relationship to youth engagement by PRP. After 25 years plus, the School Resource Officer Program, the SRO program, on-site at high schools across the region. In July 2020, the PRP announced the halt of the SRO program. This came alongside local and national concerns, highlighting the disproportionate and negative effect of the program on Black youth. PRP initiated a special community consultation process to examine the issues of police and youth engagement with a particular focus on Black youth. I don't want to sort of go through the entire history of the process, but to give you some context, in August of last year, we began to recruit 60 plus youth, parents, community organizations, and grassroots groups. We also had police officers, educators, and all the supporters of Black students to further understand and respond to the concerns around the SRO program. In October, external facilitators were brought in to lead the process. These facilitators, from the organization Pages for Good, were selected at the direction of the community and not by the police. They led the process to gather community feedback and support a better understanding of systemic inequities and outline a framework for moving forward. These community consultations continued through the early part of 2021, and there were 5 pillars that were identified. The consultative process identified these 5 pillars, along with recommendations and future considerations to address race relations stemming from systemic anti-Black racism in policing. The 5 pillars were transparency, normalization, acknowledgement, action, and equity. Again, I'm not going to sort of steal the thunder of the presenters for next month, but from those 5 pillars flowed recommendations. The report containing these recommendations were presented to the executive team in June and shared with the OHRC in July, and will be presented to the board by the facilitators, Annette and Mwali, in September. I think the presentation will be extremely informative and will touch on a number of topics that the board will have great interest in. Subject to any questions, I'll flip it over to Deputy Edwardi. Thank you.
Good morning, and through the chair, thank you, and thank you, Deputy Andrews, for that update. Just a reminder for those joining, I am the Deputy Chief of Innovation and Technology here at Peel Regional Police. However, my update today is going to touch on the recent work that we have collaborated with the board and the Ontario Human Rights Commission on the Ontario Human Rights Project here at Peel Regional Police. So I'd like to provide a brief update on that to the board and the community today. So first of all, we'd like to welcome new Chief Commissioner Patricia DeGuire. I believe Chief Commissioner DeGuire has officially commenced her role as of August 19th. And as a result, the OHRC has updated and onboarded Chief Commissioner DeGuire, specifically in relation to the work here with PRP as well. So they've taken some time to do that. And as a result, recommendations updating to the Chief Commissioner, finalization of those recommendations are currently sitting with the OHRC and soon will be available for finalization with the PRP for community engagement. And so we look forward to that in the coming days and weeks ahead. Of course, the OHRC initiative does include a data collection initiative where we have partnered with Dr. Les Jacobs and Lauren Foster. We will be focusing on traffic initiatives and race-based data collection in relation to those traffic initiatives and understanding what it is that we need to collect, setting the data standards, and then analyzing the data that we will receive over a period of a couple of years, in fact, to move forward with other data collection initiatives here at PRP. So we'll start with the traffic data collection initiative, and that is currently in the finalization stages. Dr. Lauren Foster and Les Jacobs will be communicating with our community about updates on the initiative and how they can participate in shaping the initiative as well. More to come on that in the coming weeks. And we will at PRP also communicate the communication piece from Dr. Les Jacobs and Lauren Foster. Of course, this is slightly impacted by our computer-aided dispatch replacement that we have ongoing here at the PRP. Our new CAD replacement will be able to, and we are ensuring that it is in collaboration with the data collection standards, be able to capture the race-based data, which our current system is unable to capture. So this will be a multi sort of collaborative project with other projects ongoing here at the PRP. We have a community survey that we are releasing in partnership with the OHRC in relation to our systemic racism work here at PRP. The survey is in the stages of finalization and being reviewed by the OHRC and should be ready for a release to the community on our PRP website and on the OHRC website in the coming weeks. So we look forward to that as well as we near finalization of those community survey questions. And finally, the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee terms of reference, they have met and they have met just recently. They're finalizing their terms of reference. I know there will be some discussion today at the board meeting in relation to that. The committee is just in the last stages of finalizing the terms of reference, and as a result, we'll select a chair for that committee. So for me, those are the updates on the OHRC project. Thank you.
And Nick?
Thank you, Chief, and through the chair. Good morning to members of the Police Service Board. It is, for me, a constant reminder of the quality and the type of people that we have working for this service. And those reminders come in the form of day-to-day operations, but also at times some pretty important recognition. What I would like to share with the board is 3 different pieces of recognition, followed by a quick operational update. So to begin with, this week, one of our members received the International Policing Award from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. And that award is selected from nominations that are received throughout the country. And it is intended to recognize a member or a team whose contributions really make the world a safer place and encourage international collaboration between police services. So we were incredibly thankful and very proud of our member for receiving this award. And the award revolved around her work in a child luring case. She had been acting in an undercover capacity, and through that investigation identified a male who was living in the United States who had been sexually abusing his 15-year-old stepdaughter. After a comprehensive investigation, they were also able to determine not only was he sexually abusing her, but had been covertly videotaping her and his biological son and sharing those images online. We worked with our security partners along with American law enforcement agencies, and were able to identify him and ultimately rescue that victim, well, both victims. So very, very proud. And it's my pleasure to share details of that with the board, because it is a really distinguishable honor to receive that from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. The next piece of information I would like to share is one of our members has been successfully selected as aide-de-camp for the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Again, a really important honor for a member to receive that, and that's Inspector Lisa Hewison. Inspector Lisa Hewison had been selected after a very comprehensive search and competition process. So we're very happy that she is Peel's representative as aide-de-camp for the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. I'm very proud of her for that. And then finally, 2 of our Marine officers were also selected for an award from the Mississauga Real Estate Board for police merit. And their selection for that award relates to an incident where 3 boaters who were on a canoe had capsized and were struggling in the water. Once they received the information, they attended the location of, or that had been reported, were able to locate all 3 men who were struggling, suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion, and ultimately rescue them, render first aid, and then bring them to paramedics. Again, some great work from Constables Duke and Beveridge in really saving those men's lives and preventing a really, really tragic scenario. So a tip of the hat to those members. And then finally, in terms of an operational update, in early June, our members entered into a joint forces operation with our policing partners in Halton and the Canadian Border Services Agency, and began an investigation into high-level, high-quantity drug trafficking that was occurring throughout the GTA. I'm proud to announce that that investigation has come to an end. That joint forces operation or investigation has ended and ended successfully. In total, we have had 12 people arrested, 44 charges laid, inclusive of a variety of trafficking charges, production charges, and drug-related charges, in addition to firearms charges. Over 1,000 kilograms of deadly illegal drugs were seized as a result of this investigation. This included cocaine, fentanyl, ecstasy, cannabis, just about everything you can imagine, which they were supplying throughout the GTA for trafficking to help really feed the drug trade. So we're very proud of the opportunity to participate in that joint forces operation with our policing partners. And with that, unless there's any other questions, concludes my updates.
Thanks, Nick, and we'll return it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any board members with questions or announcements? Okay, seeing none, we can continue. The first item of our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the meeting held on Friday, June 25th, 2021. Can I have a mover to approve the minutes? Albound and seconded by Martin. All in favor? Okay, that's been carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to the deputations. Our first deputation today is from Ms. Anuradha Verma. She will be speaking to item number 10 of the public agenda, PSB Anti-Black Advisory Panel Report. If you can please welcome her. There she is. Welcome to our meeting. You can unmute yourself and begin. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm not sure if this is the first video deputation by a member of the public, but if so, glad we got here. Yeah. Good morning. My name is Anuradha Verma. My pronouns are she and her. Like many others, I've been concerned about the perpetuation of systemic anti-Black racism by Peel Regional Police, and that, like other non-Black South Asian folks, I'm coming into this work following the leadership of Black advocates and organizers here in Peel. A reminder, all non-Black individuals, which includes all of the members of the Peel Police Services Board, benefit from and are complicit in and perpetuate anti-Black racism. That's the structure of the place we live. This is a reality you and we must confront. Today and every day, you have an opportunity to disrupt that by making decisions with tangible actions. As Chair Atia said, I'm here to speak about agenda item number 10. The executive director has not provided you with the right info, context, or analysis for the decision at hand. If you follow the recommendation to instead establish a diversity and inclusion committee, you have completely misunderstood the request from resident and advocate David Boswell, as well as the broader demands from individuals, groups, organizations, and institutions from across Peel that have been organizing and talking about this from as early as 1989. I'll make 5 points to make this clear. The first one, the report and other documents that come to the board provide a very specific, quite limited perspective on the efforts to address anti-Black racism and other systemic oppressions within Peel. These efforts have been criticized and discussed here at the board briefly and in media for not engaging well and not actually resulting in any evaluated impact. For example, the committee connected to the Human Rights Project stemming from the MOU, which we just heard the Deputy Chief speak about with the OHRC, has demonstrated a lack of transparency with no information provided to community or even the board at the May board meeting about the process to recruit those members. At least one member, an executive director of one of the few organizations that support survivors of gender-based violence, has been forced to leave. Local media coverage about this has been quite disturbing. Another example amongst the committees referenced in the report, such as the situation table, are not representative of the diversity of community-based organizations in Peel, have not been universally well received by even mainstream organizations that support and provide services to Black and other racialized community members. Look at the membership, ask questions about who is not participating and why, and I would encourage you to also ask about the correspondence regarding the situation table when first introduced. The sum total of the initiatives listed don't justify the recommendation for a diversity and inclusion committee. From a critical perspective, a D&I committee doesn't replace an anti-Black advisory panel. The board can take a different approach by bringing the work of understanding the needs of community members, groups, and organizations through hearing directly, rather than hearing through reports of other tables. You can have an advisory panel. 2. Since the establishment of the initiatives listed in the report, PRP has continued to be called out for systemic racism, including racial profiling. This includes the recent case this month of PRP officers' treatments of LaTanya Grant, whose cousin Jermaine Carby was murdered by Peel Regional Police in 2014, which was the subject of a coroner's inquest in 2016, resulting in 16 recommendations that have not been fully implemented, and whose family is currently suing PRP. Grant was shot at a recent gathering in August, and when she called 911, rather than provide her with care, PRP officers treated her like a suspect, impeded paramedics from providing her with care, took her belongings, and got a search warrant for her car. Another piece is the data included in today's meeting about the use of force, which is extremely disturbing to all of you, I'm sure, and all of the community members, indicating that Black individuals experience use of force incidents at a rate more than 3 times higher than non-Black individuals. The board can take a different approach by bringing the work of understanding the impacts of PRP's systemic anti-Black racism directly, rather than hearing through reports. An advisory panel. Number 3. On the operational side, PRP continues to say that they will engage, but there are serious gaps in the process and in whose feedback is counted. There are numerous examples from the CCDI audit, which I'm happy to talk about with any of you because I attended community engagement sessions, to the so-called process around the SRO program, through to conversations around body-worn cameras. On the board side, there's a gap and a limited opportunity to engage as well. The highest number of deputations ever sent to Peel Regional Police was in June 2020 regarding body-worn cameras and asking for a fundamental shift in how Peel Regional Police thinks about policing. They were largely discarded, with one board member even not believing that 90+ people would have their own individual thoughts and experiences and want to write to the board to express their concern. Engagement does not need to be only on the operational side. The board can take this work on. Since there is a lack of engagement or trust between the board and residents, generally, most of whom don't understand your role, don't know who you are, don't feel that they can come to the board with concerns or ideas. The board can take a different approach. This is not uncommon for boards or governance bodies. Just because it doesn't exist in other police service boards doesn't mean that you can't do it. An advisory panel. Number 4. Now former Chief Commissioner of the OHRC, Ina Chadha, in one of her last pieces of work, released the Framework for Change to Address Racism in Policing. It's a really, really important document. I hope that you've all read it and mapped it against your legislative responsibilities. I'll point to number 2 in that framework, which encourages implementing specific measures, including policies, which are in your domain. And number 4, accelerating efforts to civilianize police services. To quote the framework, the current model of policing is no longer sustainable. The reform proposed so far has just barely begun to be implemented and is simply not enough for Peel residents. The mobile crisis rapid response teams are simply not enough. We have lost too many people. Mental health crises, traffic, gender-based violence, bylaw enforcement, youth engagement, these are all areas of work better suited to others here in Peel. The chief himself has said that upwards of 80% of PRP's work is not related to criminal activity. And PRP hasn't been able to seriously heed the call for radical reimagining. And maybe that's unsurprising given it's the context of an organization with a large staffing and infrastructure and a collective agreement. There doesn't seem to be a real vested interest in making that happen, but you can as a board. For our neighbors in Toronto, they've launched the Community Crisis Support Service pilot, a non-police mental health pilot, and begun to look at non-police emergency response options. Abolition as a framework is also possible. The place to kickstart these conversations is the board. You set priorities, you are the place for public discussion about this, and you approve the budget. An advisory panel is a great place to have these conversations and to make tangible action possible. This is a naturally complementary group to the operational work that's happening that the deputy chiefs and the chief have spoken about today and will undoubtedly speak about in the future. An advisory panel that's connected to and works with the board is one tangible action that you can take today, and the real heavy lifting is to come. I look forward to a motion from one of the members to approve an anti-Black racism advisory panel today. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll take questions. Councillor Maziris.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thank you for your delegation and very thoughtful in some of your comments. I always struggle with the whole concept, and I know, for example, in the report it alludes to a diversity and inclusion committee per se, and I know some of your comments were that you were against that because it should be focused on an anti-Black advisory committee specifically. And then I have the challenge of other community groups who come forward and say, we would like advisory committees as well. I know the South Asian community has been very vocal, having a group per se. Can you just speak to pros and cons of or what you're, just elaborate a little bit more on why we shouldn't do a diversity committee? Because I've been, to be quite honest, I've been sort of going back and forth on the virtues of both models.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councillor Medeiros. It's an excellent question, and I'll actually kind of throw it back to say, just as a reminder, there are chiefs committees specific to certain racialized committees. I didn't have time in my deputation to talk about all of those, but one of the concerns from community members, including South Asian community members and 2S LGBTQ folks, I'm a queer South Asian person, is that those are on paper. Do they actually work? Are they a place of engagement? So in some ways, technically on paper, you've already got spaces to engage from the operational side. The recommendation from the Executive Director for a Diversity and Inclusion Committee doesn't actually respond to the request that was made around the panel. This was more like a committee of the board. And so that would be sort of like functionally similar to other committees that exist in-house. And that's not what community members are asking for. They're asking for an advisory panel, which is a little bit different in function. That's one piece. The second piece is, we know that we are in a moment of crisis. It's been a long moment of crisis around PRP's perpetuation of anti-Black racism. The data that we have so far, even though it's limited, shows that really clearly. And I'm really glad to see, excellent researchers on the call today too, who are going to help you see that as well. The case is already made in the data that we need to actually talk about tackling anti-Black racism. One thing that we know as a non-Black South Asian person is when we can address anti-Black racism within our community in Peel, it benefits everyone. And that should be, kind of justification enough. If you want to have a conversation about South Asian community experiences, I think that, that there are some other places for that to happen, and those already exist. We have South Asian representation on this board. We don't have Black representation on this board, for example. So a lot more that I could say there, but I will say the other piece from a critical anti-racist perspective is when we use the language of diversity and inclusion, we actually we're watering down what it is that we want to do. And that's not the signal that you want to send to community. And the diversity and inclusion initiatives that existed in other parts of the region, like the city of Mississauga's one, have largely failed. So let's take a lesson from where they haven't worked and try something else.
Yeah, and I guess just through the chair, last question regarding the difference between an advisory panel or a committee. What in your mind do you articulate, having served on council and having dealt with various forums, what is in your mind the fundamental difference between an advisory panel and a subcommittee?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I am a consultant also. I do governance work and I know a lot about the kind of structure of internal committees. And so I want you to move away from the idea of a committee that's kind of like bureaucratic in nature. We can see even with the human rights or the anti-racism committee there, they were meeting for 6 or 7 months before terms of references even started to get finalized. And I think what David Boswell and others are recommending is a place for concerns about tangible actions and providing input to the strategy policies that the board would provide. I think that's what we could talk about. Can talk about it as a time-limited process if you'd like. Think about it as being complementary to the operational side. It's not about, let's ask this data question per se, because there's another place for that to happen. But instead saying all of the conversations about anti-Black racism perpetuated by PRP that are actually not being listened to in some of those other places, how can the board have a direct line of communication between the community who's asking for change and you? I'll leave it to you to figure out the kind of logistical pieces there, but I would say it doesn't function like a typical committee of the board that's going to have a lot of time with process at the top end and to be mostly made up of members of the board, right? And it has to be something else. Advisory means they're giving you advice and you got to heed it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chada.
Thank you, Ms. Verma. Thank you for coming here today and for your presentation. I do understand and acknowledge that you referenced that there was 90 plus delegations, and but at the same time, I'm not saying that we do not acknowledge that or we did not hear them out or something, but at the same time, we take the full responsibility for that. I remember that was last year and fully acknowledged the sentiments. And but at that time, we were the beginning of the pandemic, and the structure was not really appropriate. I guess they set it up for everyone to speak as we were changing our in-person meeting to, I believe that was the very first or the second meeting, if I'm not sure. And we tried our best to communicate. Obviously, we keep an eye over everything ever since I personally got appointed on the board. Take the great pride to and totally connected with the communities throughout the Peel region and beyond. And so as many of the board members, and the recent, ever since the management or ourselves, we came on the board. I'm not sure if general public has seen the positive changes, but we got a lot of good feedback. And again, you're always open to listen. With that, we can only move forward, and we can put together a better structure than we thought. Whether that's at the police board or any other organization, but we are fully committed here to listen and work according to the needs of the community, and that's our commitment. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. If I could just quickly just respond to say, yeah, I mean, figuring out things in a pandemic is certainly a challenge. I mean, members of this board have also said we just wouldn't have time to hear enough of those deputations. Like, the fact that that I may likely be the first video delegation, which only came after community advocates said, why do other police service boards receive delegations by video and you don't? It's only, we have to push you to make change. And there's a lot of things that people are pushing for. And if the smallest one of being able to delegate appropriately is such a struggle, there are some questions. I will say, I watch police service board meetings. I live tweet them to get information into the hands of the public. And there's very little engagement with deputations or delegations. There are 1 or 2 questions from a few key board members, but generally speaking, the content kind of comes and goes, and it's not referred to in following meetings unless it's something that, is directed to staff to investigate, like David Boswell's request. So it's not surprising that there isn't a trust. I would say look at the data around who watches the video live streams, how many people participate in these meetings. Given how many people live in Peel, it's extremely, extremely, extremely low. people don't understand what your role is. And that at minimum indicates that the opportunity for engagement is higher. And finally, I'll say, like, how do we engage when we get blocked? For example, the chief has blocked me on Twitter. How do we engage appropriately in that manner if we're not able to, actually say the things that we need to without fear of reprisal? Thank you.
Thank you, Verma. I'll go next to Mayor Crombie, and then after that, Mr. Howe.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Anu. I just came back onto your presentation, and I have read the report thoroughly. And it is unfortunate that more people aren't engaged and don't watch online. I think we have about 26 people on today, but at the same time, this is an oversight board. We provide oversight to primarily strategic issues, not operational issues, to the chief. And then specifically on your request and David Bosfeld's request, which we take very sincerely, I tend to support the direction of our executive director in the D&I committee. And that is because I also have my own Black Advisory Committee, and we are striking up a number of other committees as well. And of course, you know that Mississauga does have the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. And I think it's a shame. I'm very disappointed to think that, to hear you criticize it in the way that you did. I think there was a lot of promise for this committee, and there still is. We have some excellent members. We've just appointed 2 new members, and I'm very proud of the choices we have made. We created the committee so that we have an ear to the community. And if anything, it was less functional the first term because it was unmanageably large. And if there are any criticism to be made, I think it's that there was so much interest and enthusiasm in the Diversity Inclusion Advisory Committee. We had 180 applicants, and we often don't get any applications for some of our boards. We ended up choosing 24 people, so of course quorum was 13, and it became a little unmanageable. This time, we've made it much more manageable. We have some excellent people, and we're doing great work. But that said, I hear you. There's always room for improvement anywhere. And we have struck, as you know, I have a Black Advisory Committee, but I'm also looking at an anti-Islam hatred committee and an anti-Asian hatred committee and an anti-Semitic committee, people to advise me on specific issues. And I know that Mayor Brown does as well. And frankly, I know the chief does as well. So whether this is the role of a governance board to engage with the community in that way, to strike up a number of different committees to advise us is something the board will have to decide, because I am already being informed by these groups, and as is the chief, and as are the representative, Councillor Medeiros from Brampton, who I know works closely with the mayor. I feel satisfied that if we have a diversity and inclusion advisory committee to the board, it would capture many of those representatives. And then if there be further need to, I guess we can, create different subgroups of that committee. But I don't want to duplicate what I'm already doing at the city, which is striking up a number of committees to advise me on issues that are very difficult and very challenging. And I really appreciate the input they're giving me and the advice they give me. I listen to them. But this is a governance board. We provide oversight to the chief and to the deputies on policy matters, and I'm not entirely sure that we have the capacity to strike up a number of these committees once again to hear input from the community. I would rather invite the board when I hold consultations, whether it be with DIAC or any number of my advisory committees, and to join me so they can have the benefit of the discussion. And you're welcome, and I know that you have participated. So I think this is new territory for us, Anu, and I think we're going to take it slowly And if the executive director, Rob, is recommending in his view that we start with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, then I think I'm going to support that and see how it goes. And I will continue to open up my advisory meetings to my fellow board members here on Police Board. And if they want to join me, they're welcome to, as many of them did throughout my Black community engagement sessions and consultations, as they did when the chief held his as well. So very difficult issues. I agree with you. We are attempting to tackle them, but each in our own way. And we will continue to do so. So thank you, Anu. No questions, just a long comment. Thank you.
Before we go to Mr. Howell, sorry, Ms. Herman, did you have?
Yeah. Thank you,
You
Chair.
can make it.
That's you. I'll make it brief. Yeah, just to say, yeah, appreciate those concerns. And I mean, this is not the place to debate the Mississauga Dayak one, but you know, the fact that it's getting restructured with some additional insights, and yeah, there's lots of media talk about that committee, which we could talk about offline. But I will say, yes, this is a governance table. Governors do get external input. The scope is quite different. Remembering that your legislative responsibilities include guidelines for administration of public complaint system, recognizing that there is a place for talking about the budget, there is a place for talking about remuneration, there is a place for talking about effective management. I have seen excellent examples, at least on the not necessarily police services board, but other kinds of organizations where governors can strike advisors to give them the strategic advice within their scope, asking the right questions, and having that tailored approach that focuses on anti-Black racism, which is what we need. The work is slow, but it's too slow for us in community. I need to say that to you. It is too slow for us. Thank you, Chair Atia.
Thank you, Ms. Rami. Before Mr. Howell speaks, I just want to inform the board that we're going to pull up the agenda item about this issue, the presentation by our executive director after the second deputation, so we can naturally just transition the conversation into an action item. So with that, Mr. Howell.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie. You virtually took the entirety of my thoughts, and I thank you for that. And just in continuation with that, and I'd like to thank you for your comments and your deputation. You're very well spoken. I can see you're very passionate about your comments. However, I would just add, in reference to Mayor Crombie's comments, you obviously are not Black, and you are still very passionate about Blacks, and I think you represent your position about your concerns very well. To suggest that because we do not have a Black candidate on our board doesn't mean we cannot be just as passionate and understanding and representative of that position. And I think that we can understand and defend those positions just as well as you are passionate about your feelings about that. And continuance of Mayor Crombie's, I certainly support her position and all her comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Atia, you are muted, but I think you are either asking me if I want to respond or you want to move on.
No, I wasn't asking that. I actually wanted to move on if you allow us.
I'll just say one last thing, which is, while I can certainly appreciate that, like I said at the beginning, I'm taking and following the leadership of Black community organizers and advocates, and Black community organizers and advocates are pointing to the lack of Black representation on this board. It's not my idea, it's theirs. And so I want to echo that. The other thing I'll say is, I don't think there's demonstrated expertise, skills, training, et cetera, around addressing anti-Black racism within this board. That isn't any of your wheelhouse, as you've indicated, and your bios on the website indicate. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verma. Thank you.
Chair Atia, sorry, it's Mayor Crombie.
Yeah.
As you know,
Go
I'm
ahead,
on my phone until I get back home and onto my computer.
No
Just wanted to remind the board that we did have a Black representative on the board, Norma Nicholson. On the previous board, I sat on that for 2 years. She was an excellent individual, but unfortunately, Chair Atia, you have the Peel appointment this time. So the Peel representative was not another Black candidate, but it was you. Certainly the province of Ontario can appoint, I make 4 appointments or 3 appointments, we make 1, and the other 3 are the elected officials or appointed officials. And so I think, we can also advocate to the province of Ontario, to the Ontario government, that it is important to have the Black community voice heard on the board, as they picked 3 of the appointments. We only picked the one, and we picked Norma Nicholson last go around. Thank you very much, Chair Atia.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie, for reminding us of that. Okay, Ms. Verma, we're going to move to actually concluding your deputation with, can I have a mover to receive the deputation? Councilor Medeiros, and I'll second that. And all in favor? Thank you. It's been carried. Thank you, Ms. Verma, for your deputation today. And if you would like, please send through the written version of it to our office. It would be very helpful. There was a lot there, and it'd be useful to read it again. Thank you. We'll move forward to our second deputation by Mr. David Bosveld regarding as well our item number 10, which I will move up to after the deputation on the Anti-Black Advisory Panel report. So is he on the call?
His deputation is a written deputation, so the board has been provided written deputation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the board members have been given the deputation and have read it. Are there any comments on this deputation? Okay, with that, can I have someone to move the deputation? Mr. Chada, and seconded by Councilor Medeiros. All in favor? Thank you. It's been carried. And so then, as I've mentioned, we'll pull up the item number 10, PSB Anti-Black Advisory Panel report. Our Executive Director, Mr. Sherpy, can you walk us through your recommendation?
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and through you. A lot of the discussion in the report, I think, has already taken place. And I want to thank Ms. Verma for her deputation. I think it was helpful. But the one thing I will say is I'm not sure that the arguments made against a D&I committee of the board wouldn't solve some of the issues that was discussed. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So the report itself stems from a request that I report back to the board following a deputation requesting an anti-Black racism advisory panel for the board itself. And one of the things I know that the board had asked me to do was to take a look at, what currently exists in the region and do an environmental scan of what else currently exists. And I think, as Mayor Crombie already alluded to, there is ongoing work being done at all 3 levels of government here in Peel, as well as a number of things that are taking place at Peel Regional Police. And I think the chief or someone on that team can provide a few more comments following my few comments here. But the one thing I think that's really important to keep in mind is that the board itself, along with Peel Regional Police, are signatories to the sort of first of its kind MOU with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And it's important to keep that in mind, that the aim of the MOU and the work currently being done with the Human Rights Commission is to develop and implement legally binding recommendations to identify and eliminate systemic racism in delivering police services. And I know that there is the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, and I know that there were some media reports out there that PRP has this committee, but some reports incorrectly stated that the board doesn't have one of those. Obviously, as a signatory, the board is part of the panel as well. And our chair Atia, actually sits on that committee. And I know that Deputy O'Doherty talked already about the fact that it's at the terms of reference stage right now, and that a chair will be named from the community. So that is moving along. And ultimately, and I looked just briefly at what some other police service boards are doing. And I think a lot of them have an approach that mirrors my recommendation, which is that the board itself, rather than having its own panel, really work with its municipalities and partners on providing a policing lens on ongoing work. And I know that it's important to have that lens, because policing matters are not always discussed at the municipal level or even at the provincial level. Things along the lines of policies and operations and budget, for example. And I think what a committee can do is it can supplement the work currently being done to ensure that there is a policing and governance lens on a lot of the work that is already being done. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that one of the comments made earlier is that The big difference between a panel and a committee is that a committee will become overly bureaucratic, whereas a panel will actually be able to deliver tangible actions that could affect policy. I don't agree with that approach. I think our committees of our board are highly engaged, and obviously every member of the board is a member of a subcommittee of the board. And I know that a lot of tangible work gets done at the committee level, many of which impact board policy. And for that reason, my recommendation is not for a single standalone anti-Black advisory panel, but rather the creation of a new subcommittee that will have terms of reference specific to what was already discussed by members of this committee, and will be supplemented by some of the work being done at Peel Regional Police and at the municipal level to ensure that an anti-racism lens is applied to the work that's done at a governance level by the board.
Thank you, Rob. We'll go to the members of the board for comments. Chief, do you want to add something? Sorry, Councillor Medeiros, just one. Chief.
I just didn't want to preclude the board members from continuing the conversation, but I think it may be an opportunity for Anthony and I to just double down on the reality that first of all, I think we as a police organization and the whole police sector recognizes that systemic significant change needs to happen across our sector, and it has taken many years to get to this place where we're at, and we recognize the community wants to see change being very obvious and transparent, but we're also very thoughtful about not being performative about our actions, and some of that requires thoughtful engagement in a space that is new to our entire sector and to bring other people along. So, I just say that because when I hand it over, Anthony, maybe you can speak again about, just to validate what Mr. Serpe has said is, the reason there's a tripartite arrangement is to not only speak about operations, but also to inform the governance function and oversight, which has been highlighted. So Anthony, maybe just a couple of points of clarification, and we'll kick it back to the board.
Thanks, Chief, and through the chair, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity. Of course, the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee that was born out of the work from the OHRC project, the tripartite agreement, is really a starting point. This is, I think, a reminder to everyone this has not been done before, and we have to start somewhere. There's a starting point for the work, and the starting point for the work comes through existing committees throughout the region, existing chief councils, anti-racism advisory councils, inviting those members to come together and to discuss, in fact, what the work will be. And to the point that it may seem slow or not fast enough for the community, and at times we all feel that way. Certainly, it's important work, very thoughtful work that the committee is working through. And that's why the establishment, I think, of the terms of reference is very important to identify the mandate and the scope of what the committee will do, with all intention not to be a police or police board-led committee. And this is really led by the community leaders. And I'm certain that an audit of the committee members will be undertaken by the committee at some point to identify if there's gaps in membership. But that is for the committee to decide, as the PRP does not chair that or will not chair that moving forward. And so I think as we move forward and we recognize that this is a starting point, this is very new, this is a paradigm shift, not only in policing, but the way the police and the community engage in reshaping policies within policing to identify and end systemic racism, we are being very thoughtful about the approach. So thank you for the opportunity to offer that to you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Rob, for the report, very thorough. I guess a couple of things stood out for me is, and the one simple thing is that, yes, there's a lot of activity, a lot of committees, but really there's not one sort of there's not one committee at one municipality that really deals with, I guess, from, based on what I heard from the deputation, dealing with sort of that policy setting and, dealing with budget allocations. And so, that is a little bit of the nitty gritty of the stuff that we do. And, when I think of just listening to the delegation, having read, the delegation which was sent to us, part of me sees a couple of issues with not doing it. One, clearly there seems to be voices of people wanting to be part of sort of the sphere of influence or being part of an engagement to be able to provide that sort of lens because they feel that they're outside of the process. And, partly, rightfully, as Mayor Crombie talked about, some of the responsibility does lie with the provincial government in terms of, representation and so on. But clearly, we have a community group or community leaders who feel that this board is not accurately or is not effectively getting sort of the advice or getting that lens. When I bring it to sort of myself, just as a board member and someone who's new, and I don't benefit the years of experience and wisdom that some of my colleagues bring, and having been more time on the board, when I'm discussing issues that are on our agenda, when we're thinking about it, I do not have any sort of reference point in which I could sort of say, wow, what does that community feel? I don't have that one sort of outlet in which I can sort of say, well, it's one thing to say, well, Mayor Crombie has a group and, Mayor Brown has one and so on, but it's not something that, as a member that I can go speak to them and say, well, what are your thoughts about this? Or having even something formalized in sort of a position or formalized in advice. And the one thing that the first delegation that really sort of reinforced what I've heard from different community leaders. I have a school trustee who's a very passionate community leader, Kathy McDonald, and other community advocates who talk about, diversity and inclusion, as important it is, sometimes as a way to water down, the focus on the Black community. And from a lot of sort of data we see, that seems to be an issue. And just lastly, before, and Rob, I'm not sure if you have that information, I keep getting pointed to the Toronto model that, and I sometimes wonder, are we overthinking this? Are we, as it seems we're spending so much time trying to sort of suggest why we don't need one when there's a community group that wants one. And we're saying, well, there's a lot of activity, a lot of things, we're participating in a lot of things, but it doesn't seem to get to the heart of the matter in which these folks are I guess, referring to. So if you can just speak to the Toronto example, just that simple. How do they make it work? Why doesn't it make sense for Peel? Any thoughts on that, the Toronto example?
Thank you, Councillor, and through the chair. The one thing I'll point out about the Toronto example, so Toronto does have its own anti-racism panel, and that came from a Human Rights Commission report on policing in Toronto, and was one of the recommendations by the commission to the city and to the Police Services Board in Toronto. The one thing I will mention that I think is an important point that we've touched upon, and I'll just focus on it a little bit more. I think because the board is a signatory to the MOU, along with Peel Regional Police and the Human Rights Commission, the same commission obviously that recommended the advisory panel for the City of Toronto and for Toronto Police Services Board. The part of the work with the Human Rights Commission does include an anti-racism advisory committee. The board is part of that. If we did have a committee of the board, they would work closely with the chair of our board who sits on it and subsequent members of the Police Services Board that would sit on that committee. But I think a lot of the work that the community is asking for would be dealt with the anti-racism advisory committee that Peel Police, the board, and the Human Rights Commission are part of. And it's important to keep in mind that the MOU is legally binding. And one of the things that the main point of this partnership is to identify and eliminate systemic racism in policing, which is what the community is asking for. And I think the work is underway and it's taking place. And obviously there's members of the community that don't think that the panel and the advisory panel is going to go far enough, but we haven't seen the terms of reference yet. So I think that I would suggest that perhaps the board hold judgment until at least we see what the terms of reference look like as it relates to what we've been hearing from the community members.
Yeah, and thank you, Rob. But just getting back to the Toronto example, then, what from your experience with the Toronto, or for what you've read, so Toronto has that in place. How does that work? How functionally, do you know how often they meet? What type of teeth they have? What type of engagement they have with the board? Do you have any information regarding that?
I don't have the specifics on that, but I can provide that to the board.
Okay. I'll allow if there's any other questions, but so a couple things I heard. One is that you would suggest we wait for the terms of reference, and the other is that you want to get more information, more specifics from the City of Toronto. I think that's an important piece of information. I personally would like to see, but I'll see what other board members have to say. Thank you.
Mr. China.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Councilor Medeiros, for asking all the wonderful questions and your comments. Just to summarize overall quickly, without taking much time, back in 2019, when I first got appointed on this wonderful board, and I'm someone who live in this region, has family, raising my family here as first generation immigrant who've been through all the odds, which I'm not the first one, follow the footsteps. The first motion I brought back in the days, and obviously not me, and with the help of, at that time, Mayor Brown, and of course, with the support of our full board, including Mr. Howell, and I remember Mr. Atia joined the first against that Quebec Bill 21, the bill they had, which is prohibits if you are wearing the religious symbols and they are stopping you. So we, whenever we come to the meeting or we go to the subcommittees, Mr. Atia is doing phenomenal work as the first Muslim chair of this wonderful board. If I'm not mistaken, he's the first one. We all come from the different background. Mr. Boughton, who is a great leader in the business industry. In the pandemic year, last year, we signed the further the 5-year negotiations with the unions with the help of Mr. Howell, who brings the great skill sets, being resident of this wonderful region and served on the Peel Police in the past. We all come from a different background and with the skill sets. And now the replacement of Mayor Brown is Councilor Medeiros, who is definitely in this region and representing the regional seat on the second term, and of course Mayor Crombie. Just ever since the deputation, even though I don't want to go back, but it bothers that the board is out of touch and not connected with the community. Sometimes I personally feel that maybe I'm not really overstepping into something, or maybe asking too many questions. Obviously, this is the back in 2019, and then the 2020 is going through the pandemic. Look at the police leadership we have, starting from Chief Nishan Durepa, and one of the senior most Deputy Mark Andrews. I don't know how many times I have reached out to Mark and seeking his advice and asking him, trying to know back in 2019 about the structure and everything. So it's, I'm not going to say that it's easy for someone to make the comment that the board is out of touch, but I don't want to say that, but God knows, or we know how we put together everything. And but with all due humbleness, I take all the criticism or the comments with open heart, and we'll try our level best to, for the near future to do our level best. But it's not just that. If I'm coming from the South Asian Sikh background only, I can think the best of the Sikh community or the South Asians. There are great individuals on this board, on the screen, and the people who are watching. They can also think, and they are doing it. Having said that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadha. Any other board members? Mr. Howe?
Thank you, Member Chadha. Those are excellent comments, and they really encourage me to speak out on that. I think that the diversity and expertise and challenges that we all bring as directors to this committee are exceptional. They're a very diversified background. We have all different members from all different communities, from different backgrounds, from different members of age groups. And our responsibilities go well beyond the challenges of ethnic diversity, but we will include those with our decisions, and our decisions go well beyond ethnic diversity. We have many other decisions to make, many other factors that affect our decisions on the police board. And I think that we're doing a great job, and we certainly deal with ethnic diversity. But I just want to emphasize, I think as Director Chad has mentioned, we do have some great diversity here, and I'm proud of it. And I think our members and our director in particular is very well versed in dealing with these matters and has led us very well. And I'm proud of it. I think our chair is handling that well, and he comes from a diversified background as our other members do. And thank you for bringing that forward, Director Chadha.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, I'll share my thoughts. You know, as chair, I'll say that, you know, our board, you know, has not shied away from prioritizing anti-Black racism and its impacts on the police service. You know, I just as a reminder that, you know, and credit to our chief, it was us who went to the Ontario Human Rights Commission to initiate this process of the MOU, which I think what's most important about that is it, you know, acknowledges or confirms our acknowledgement of the issue, and that we were willing to take real, tangible, meaningful steps towards solving issues around systemic racism and anti-Black racism. I think it's a legitimate concern from the community that, you know, we always need to make sure that in our role as a board, in our governance role, and the decisions that come underneath that umbrella, those are informed by these issues such as anti-Black racism and other, you know, other concerns from other communities. And so for me, you know, I think, Rob, you know, and speaking to your recommendation, what's important to me is that whatever decision we take, it's a decision that is long-term, that ensures there's a mandate and a mechanism by which the board continues to be informed on these issues and considers that lens as we make the decisions that we're responsible to make. And in the way that we do that, in the way that we set it up, is comprehensive. And so while the priority today, as we've already acknowledged, is anti-Black racism for our board, is one of the top priorities, and that priority needs to be very clear to the community that, you know, in the realm of racism, the larger, you know, issue of racism, anti-Black racism is a top priority for us. Whether we call it diversity and equity, that the community must be clear that that is the top priority right now, as it is in the MOU that we've signed, and other steps we're taking at the operational level. So I guess my question to you, Rob, is, you know, I like the idea of a committee because it mandates the board. Like, there will be a term of reference that is ongoing. It's not a 1 year, 2 year thing. It's an established until the board decides otherwise. I guess what is confusing to me or not clear is it's kind of like what Councillor Medeiros has been speaking to. Like we, you know, there's all these other advisory committees at different levels of municipality, the region, the chief, but how those actually inform the board. Is it the expectation that the board, that committee will participate and attend some of those meetings, or will that committee leverage those circles that exist and maybe rely on them to call on them to come meet with the board? Like, how does this translate into actual meaningful and true a process that the board is then informed by the expertise of these other existing councils or advisory committees to inform what is under the responsibility of the board, which is governance, right? So how does that happen? That's not clear to me right now. And if you can shed more light as to how you envision this via your recommendation.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I think the role of the committee would be, again, to ensure that it's leveraging expertise that currently exists, but I think there's a disconnect between what is being discussed around the terms and reference of what a committee can accomplish and what might be missing. There's nothing excluding the committee from meeting with stakeholders, whether they're community groups, whether they're individuals, and ensuring that the voices of the community are brought back to the board via the committee. I believe that the work that a committee can accomplish can often get far more granular than the work that's done at a board level. A lot of times just the nature of the work that the board does, the board itself is engaged during board meetings and the deliberations in the lead up to board meetings, whereas committees meet oftentimes less often than board meetings themselves, but the work that's done at the committee level is often far more granular, and the work that's done at the committee level informs the changes to policy that the entire board then considers and makes changes to. I think that that's the important part to keep in mind, that any policy changes that currently takes place at the board level goes through the committee process already. So the changes that certain members of the community want to see, and I think the level of engagement that the entire community wants to see from a board governance perspective, would it be precluded through the work of a committee? In fact, I actually believe it would be enhanced. I want to also, keep in mind that the original request was for an anti-Black racism advisory committee. I think what the ability for the committee to do is to ensure that the voices of all members of the diverse communities in Peel are heard and brought to the board at the governance at the governance level, and that through the work that the committee can do, through the work that's already being done with the Human Rights Commission, and through the work that's being done through the community well-being plan. I think that that's an important part as well to keep in mind, because the idea behind the safety and well-being plan is to look at the relationships that already exist within the various levels of government, to take a more holistic look at, in our case, public safety and policing in the community.
So Rob, just a quick follow-up. So just at a very, I just want to understand how this plays out. So will this committee kind of have the authority as we go through budget or as we go through our strategic planning process to call on, say, for example, the chief's advisory committees and say, we'd like to meet with you on this topic. So we're leveraging existing platforms to speak with them on issues that are important to our decision-making process. Is that kind of where this would go?
So that's my vision, yes, of what the committee would do. I will state the obvious, which is that the committee ultimately is responsible for approving the terms of reference. So I think that all board members will have an opportunity to provide their input and impact what final terms of reference for the committee would look like, and what that relationship with the existing advisory panels and the existing community groups would look like.
Thank you. I'll take a pause there. Any final comments, or Councilor Medeiros?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the information, Rob. I guess I want to go back to when Member Chada was talking about, how representative this board is, and I don't think that's in question. And I think the focus of what we're hearing from the community, how did we get here? And I know, we've heard comments such as, well, we're signatories to, the Human Rights Commission, so on and so on. But we've heard from members that they don't have enough information on it and don't feel that they were consulted. We've heard from members that there are governance and governance issues specifically that they feel that they don't have a lens on. We hear, so there's a lot of stuff, and it just seems that we're going around in circle. And sorry again, and I got to say that if I was watching this and I wasn't part of this board, I would say that we're trying to shy away from what seems to be the inevitable, and what seems to be the focus on what this group is asking for. Essentially is, can we support an anti-Black advisory committee? And I know we've come back, and originally I thought, a diversity committee would be probably the way to go, and I'm fine with that. And what I see and envision the committee doing is providing recommendations for or against on sort of our agenda, and that sort of sounding board. And I think we have to have that sort of space and be able to have these conversations. And so I'm inclined to send the report back. And I just another comment, Rob, I would have, and I say this respectful, is that when we moved the motion originally, we talked about the Toronto example. So the fact that we don't have that information here is to me, disappointing. And I'm hope that, that what comes back would be a report on, or it would be a modification of report that would encompass the Toronto the Toronto example, and also the terms of reference which you speak to that you think that might adhere to some of what the community is requesting. So I think we have two paths. Either we make a decision today and we decide to go with the diversity committee, which I would probably move an amendment not to call it the diversity committee, it would just be an anti-Black committee, or we send the report back for Rob just to provide us with some more information for our consideration, look at the Toronto example, or encompass also the terms of reference, which time it is produced, for us to be able to share with the community so they know in a transparent way, this is what we're going to be tackling. So I think ultimately we're all saying the same thing. It's just the community is wanting to have a voice in an area which they seem to not have to have a voice. And we have, we're doing all this great stuff, but all this great stuff is in, it's almost like inside baseball, and all these people are sitting around, questioning, are we doing this or we're doing this? So, I kind of feel that, we're left with two paths, or simply we receive the report and we do nothing, and that's a viable option. So effectively, I'm inclined to send the report back, defer it, and at which point, we can have more, meet around exactly what this committee would be doing, and allow for our consideration. I think it's worthwhile going forward with it. And, I guess in the form, through you, Chair, I would move a motion of deferral for our next meeting. And do you think, Rob, through you, Chair, we would have the information from the Ontario Human Rights Commission or the terms of reference?
I'll ask Deputy Doherty to speak specifically to whether or not the terms of reference will be ready by the next meeting, should the board defer the report.
I think that Councilman, you want to know that you want to see the terms of reference for the OHRC's advisory.
Yeah, through you, Chair, because our executive director had suggested that some of the stuff that we're asking for could be addressed at us being a signatory to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And I think what the frustrations out there is no one knows what that means, right, and they don't understand that information. So I'm wondering if when we come back with that information, that might be something that the community might be satisfied with, knowing that some of this work is going to be taken at that with the Ontario Human Rights Commission already, and then also bringing information back in terms of what Toronto's doing. So by the deferral, that's what my intent is on doing it, unless some members suggest.
So Councilor Medeiros, before we go to you, Mr. Howell, I'd like to actually act on this motion. So would someone like to second this motion? Okay, it's been seconded by Mayor Crombie. With that, moving that along, let's see if the board will accept this motion. And then if that's the case, we'll move on. If not, we'll come to a different motion.
Sorry,
Should I take comment, Rob?
yeah, we need
Yeah.
to discuss. Mhm.
We need to discuss the motion. Okay.
But the only question I'll ask Councillor Medeiros for some clarity on, he mentioned that a committee would be providing, would be able to, is what the community is asking for. I guess my question to the councillor is, because the board is part of the OHRC and that a anti-racism advisory committee was established, I guess I wonder what the community would want from a board anti-racism advisory committee that would be different than the one that the board is part of at the OHRC PRP level, because it sounds like that, and that's the point I tried to make.
Rob, the OHRC advisory committee has a very specific scope, right? It's not mandated today to inform the board on governance issues of the board per se. There may be elements that exist, right, but not necessarily on all responsibilities of the board. So unless we extend the terms of reference of that committee, or we decide we'll leverage that committee, we have to I think we should formally do that, right? Does that make sense? Or yeah. Okay. They'll open it up for comment. I'll go first too, if you allow me, Mayor Crombie. I think Mr. Howell had raised his hand, and then we'll come to you. Is that okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really want to see the terms of reference of what's being proposed and would like some more information about what Toronto's doing. I mean, I personally don't mind sitting on another committee, but if it's the sentiment of this board, and these are very important voices to be listened to, because obviously they don't feel heard. We saw the newspaper articles that they do feel that they are overly represented in the statistics, and maybe we can address that specifically through this committee. But I would personally like to see a terms of reference before I vote on anything. So I think you need to, I don't know if this is a referral or a deferral, Martin, but whatever it is, take it back, find out what Toronto is doing, how they do it, and come up with the terms of reference, and then let us vote on that and what that would look like. Thank you.
How?
Well, I was going to make a motion to accept the recommendation before the committee. I thought we'd discuss this enough and come to that conclusion, but there's a motion before the floor, so we'll have to vote on that first.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Any other comments on the motion? Just looking around here, seeing none. So all in favor of that motion? Okay, and so I think that's four votes. So I think that's been carried, Rob. So you have the directions clear, right?
Yep.
Okay, very good. And so we'll probably hopefully have this ready for discussion again in our next board meeting. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Chair, just for a point of clarification for the terms of reference, it does not appear at this time that the terms of reference will be finalized until mid-October or beginning of October, which may not be ready for the September meeting. So just as a point of clarification. However, I will endeavor to ask the committee to provide a draft if they allow, so that there can be some understanding of what the terms are for the next meeting, if that's appropriate.
Okay, we'll leave some flexibility there between from Mr. Survey. Okay. Moving along to the next agenda item, our consent agenda numbers 4, 5, and 6. In accordance with the board's procedures policy, we'll now move to the consent agenda. Do any members wish to remove any items from consent? Okay, seeing none, can I have a motion to approve items number 4 to number 6? Mr. Bowden, seconded by, I'll second that. All in favor? Okay, that has been carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to other new business. The first item we have is the 2020 Corporate Risk Management Annual Report. Chief, would you like to take this on?
Thank you, Chair Atia, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. As the board will see, this board report is a very comprehensive board report, which includes, as you know, civil litigation, professional standards related activities, as well as provincially legislated reporting, which is inclusive of suspect apprehension pursuits and use of force reports. So to that vein, we have available to speak to the variety of different elements. Our legal counsel, Sharon Wilmot, is not here, but we have Jovana Orobovic, who's on virtual here with us, as well as Inspector Bill Ford from Professional Standards and Superintendent Dirk Niles from Corporate Development. But I think what we wanted to highlight is, and I'm very thankful for his time here, is Professor Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, who has graciously provided his time in a long morning thus far. So thank you for your patience, sir, to specifically speak to, with Superintendent Niles, the changes that we've seen provincially in the requirements for use of force reporting that began as of January 2020, that required different form of reporting, which includes race-based data. And we know that, I think Mayor Crombie alluded to, that we've already seen some media coverage on it. But we do believe that the specific piece of data requires some communication from us as an organization. I think it's very much in line with us demonstrating our commitment and to do better to understand the information before us. And I think the first thing I'd like to say, subject to you, Chair, I'd like to turn it over to the professor and Superintendent Niles. But as an organization, and as has been done, right across the province and nationally, is immediately upon seeing and understanding the overrepresentation, is this discussion and a desire to understand what this means. How do we add context to it? But to do that through the application and thoughtfulness of evidence-based strategies. And, the professor represents, one example of us, but perhaps one of the best examples in our community of relying on race-based data experts to add clarity to what data says, what's missing, and also the interconnectivity to other pieces of information that we need. The second part is, and I think Dirk will speak to this, is we want to be able to demonstrate our commitment to explore strategies to reduce, this disproportionate data, as well as, and Anthony spoke to it, is implementing comprehensive data and metrics to and platforms from a training perspective to really show progression in our industry as it pertains to all interactions between our members and the public. And I think we have heard, and even as close as the deputations, is the interconnectivity between policing and to other human services all impacts certain populations in a disproportionate manner, which we really have never peeled back, nor have we committed to, even on our side of the house, building metrics and the systems where we can even look at the data. So we want to begin this journey in a very thoughtful way. So I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Niles, perhaps to introduce the professor. And after they're done concluding, obviously I'm going to ask Superintendent or Deputy Eduardi to speak as well. So Dirk, if I can turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chief. Good morning, and through you, Chair. As the Chief mentioned, this was the first year that police agencies were required to report on officer perceived race when submitting use of force reports. So in compiling the 2020 use of force report, we realized that there was an overrepresentation of the Black community, which was very concerning to the Chief, the deputies, and all of our senior leadership team. But in our analysis, we quickly realized that the current ministry reporting parameters was not providing us enough data or information to understand why the overrepresentation existed, and that we needed to expand and utilize our race-based data collection to have a holistic picture of what was really going on. We took immediate action and we began implementing evidence-based strategies to study, understand how we could possibly reduce this disparity and implement mandatory training, change policies, organizational initiatives through our partnership with OHRC, and our race-based data collection experts. And one of those experts who's here with us today is Dr. Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, who has graciously made time to join us today despite being on vacation, so thank you for that. Professor, to discuss why the disparity exists, what data collection metrics police organizations can implement, which we will be doing, and then help us inform what strategies, specifically as it relates to training and other initiatives, would be useful. So formally introducing Dr. Owusu-Bempah. He's a professor at the Department of Sociology with U of T and an affiliate scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and a senior fellow at Massey College. His research examines the intersection of race, crime, and criminal justice with a focus specifically on policing. Professor Bempah is frequently called upon to provide commentary and advice to justice agencies, government bodies, community organizations, and media outlets on matters relating to policing, justice, and social inequality. He routinely publishes in academic and popular forums, and my team and I have been working with him quite closely for the past 10 months to help develop and implement new human rights focused that has not been produced anywhere in policing. So Professor, I'll turn it over to you.
Superintendent Niles, thank you for the introduction. Chair, Chief Mayor, thank you for allowing me to speak today and for my involvement in this work. As noted, this topic is central to the work that I do. Police have an important job in our society. They're provided with an immense amount of power, and that immense amount of power really is no clearer than it is in the ability to use force. Now, clearly, what we're seeing in the statistics that have been captured in this document is an overrepresentation of Black people in the use of force data at a rate about 3.5, 4 times their representation in the general population in Peel. This to me is both deeply troubling, but not surprising based on what we know about the overrepresentation of Black people in a host of policing outcomes, not only in Peel, but across the GTA. So when we look at Peel statistics in context, they're quite similar to the rates of overrepresentation captured in the work that my colleague Scott Wortley did with the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the Toronto Police Service. They're lower than they are in a number of other services where data has been made available in Ontario. But I think it's important to note that in those services or in those jurisdictions, Black people make up a much lower proportion of the general population. And so my initial thinking there is that many of the people represented in those use of force statistics are probably actually from out of town, which gets to an important point about how we contextualize these data and the metrics that are being used. How can we understand this overrepresentation? What are the drivers of the disparities? We know from research here in Canada and in other jurisdictions, and namely research in the United States, that there are kind of 4 key drivers of inequality in policing generally and inequality with respect to race and police use of force. One that garners a lot of attention, of course, is individual officer decision-making, and whether that's based on implicit or explicit biases. And these, of course, are increasingly being addressed by police agencies in Canada and in Peel in particular. Looking at institutional practices, policies and practices, where officers are deployed, how they're trained. And then, of course, we need to look on the side of the community as well, looking at racial differences and patterns of offending, and particularly in violent offending, as well as racial differences in demeanor when interacting with the police. So one of the, I think that the ministry needs to be given, the province needs to be given credit for initiating this race-based data collection system within policing and with respect to police use of force. But as it stands right now, it doesn't tell us enough about what's driving the disparities to allow the service and allow other services to adequately address and work to reduce those disparities. From my perspective, I think based on the data that's probably, if not readily available, quite easily captured, I would want to see not only information on racial differences, but including other variables such as gender, age, mental health, intoxication, the behavior of the civilian criminal history, number of subject officers, type of force used, alternative strategies such as de-escalation attempts, and whether, importantly, the force resulted from reactive or proactive policing, of course, presence of weapons, and then getting beyond simply policing activity, looking at things like community crime rates. So these are the types of variables and the types of information that I would like to see, and I think would be ideally captured in use of force reporting by the service that would help inform the service's priorities, policies, decision-making, and practices, would help the community better understand how force is being used. And these are exactly the types of things that I've recommended to Superintendent Niles, and that the service, it seems, will be looking at and working to capture in order to inform, as Superintendent Niles has noted, training protocols, which I think should be developed in a feedback loop. The evaluation of the training should go to inform the policies and practices and so on. So I'm going to leave my comments there. I said this before, I give entire hour-long lectures on this exact topic. I will not subject you to that now, but I am happy to answer any related questions.
Thank you, Professor. And Dirk, not to preclude you, did you want to top up? I'd like the Anthony just to finish off, and then we could open it to the board for discussion.
Sure. Just to top up on what the professor said, Chief, we're taking a two-pronged approach. First and foremost, we are changing how we're going to collect the data based on the professor's recommendations and our other race-based data experts. So we're building those parameters with an internal analyst, and we're going to do regular quarterly reporting so we can stay on top of the trend to see if the second pillar that we're going to be implementing, which is our training and introducing procedural justice training, advanced crisis de-escalation, unconscious bias training, giving our officers contextual historical issues of racism, as well as what we're doing with trauma-informed training and body-worn cameras. And the synergy of the training and the body-worn cameras with the collection of the actual metrics and data, our hope is that the contribution of those two will reduce this disparity based on what I've learned from working with the professor and the other race-based data experts. So we have already started that. We have already begun rolling that out. We implemented our scenario-based unconscious bias trauma-informed anti-racism training and incorporated in our body-worn camera training for the first half of this year. And in the second half of the year, we're introducing procedural justice and taking a trauma-informed approach so that we can give our officers the knowledge, skills, and abilities to hopefully reduce this disparity.
Thank you, Dirk. And we want to recognize that this is uncharted territory for pretty much every police organization, and we sincerely appreciate the the objective expertise that the professor brings to the table and his recognition. But on the training side, we also want to set the bar and step out like no other organization has done also. Anthony has about 3 or 4 points that we wanted the board to be aware of that are also directly related to this space of work, which ties us into a larger scale. So Anthony.
Thanks, Chief, and through the chair, certainly given the recommendations of Dr. Owusu-Bempah, given the work of our training bureau, many of the initiatives we've had here, we look through a human rights lens now to support the data and the data collection within the service to be able to implement and adopt best practices. Some of the things that we're doing to support this is, of course, part of the innovation technology is standing up a strategic initiatives department. And part of that is our analytics bureau and our data capturing bureau, which was absent here in PRP over a year ago. So committing through the initiation of our analytics bureau with our OHRC project in partnership with other academics like Dr. Lauren Foster and Les Jacobs from York University, we are looking to identify and collect the appropriate race-based data and standards to support all the initiatives that we'd like to do moving forward. Of course, the board will be familiar with the Regional Community Safety and Wellbeing Table, data collection and monitoring table. We have our Strategic Initiatives Director who contributes thoughtfully to that table, which includes discussions on race-based data collection. And of course, this ties into the Systemic Discrimination Table for Community Safety and Wellbeing. So you can see how this continuous improvement feedback loop relating to race-based data and standards will feed up into the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Of course, the OACP and CACP are working together to identify and determine proper race-based data collection standards for not just 1 or 2 organizations, but policing agencies across Canada, Ontario and Canada. And we are thought leaders, PRP are considered thought leaders in that area. And of course, through the chief's work, through his OACP role, my work through my OACP role, we are leading conversations with the province on race-based data collection and standards. And so I think when we put all this together, we are very well positioned now to be able to inform not just our community, but our members on having that human rights lens towards policing.
Thank you, Anthony. And Chair, I think I'll turn it to you because we've obviously got a great opportunity to speak to the professor.
Absolutely. So, board members, are there any questions or comments? Mayor Crombie.
To the professor, Awasu Bampa, so nice to see you again. You presented at my own Black community consultation. I wanted your opinion. You know, we were asked as you were on the deck listening patiently to the previous discussions, if you think personally it would be beneficial for us to strike such a committee so those voices can be heard better by the board.
Yeah, I think Anu made an important point in her comments earlier in that when diversity committees writ large are struck, the views, interests, concerns, and issues related to various groups that come under the umbrella of diversity often get lost. And I think it's important, you know, when we talk about diversity, diversity means heterogeneity within a population or difference, right? White individuals, straight individuals, men make up part of a diverse society. So when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about underrepresented groups, but the point being, you know, we're looking at the overrepresentation of Black people in use of force. When we look at other policing outcomes, especially in the GTA, it is African Canadians, Black Canadians who are particularly overrepresented and have particular needs, not only within policing, but in society more generally. When the issues facing Black people are subsumed under diversity, which includes sexual orientation, religion, race, and ethnicity, because those two things are distinct, then those concerns do often get lost. And so I do think that there is a need to have either a committee or a panel, whatever it's going to be, or a subcommittee of one of those, or a subgroup that focus specifically on the interests of Black people.
Thank you, Professor. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll share two of mine. So Dirk, I think you kind of presented it into, you know, there are two aspects of this, and data and training. So I have a question on each. On the data side, the professor talked about a whole list of other data elements that are important to actually contextualize this and translate it into something meaningful that, you know, changes the way things are done. How have we already come to an agreement or a decision on what that data set will look like, and or is that still being developed? And how long is this process? How long will it take before that data is available to the service?
So, Chair, thank you for the question. We are actually internally organizing all of our different systems and how we can pull together several of the metrics that the professor has suggested. In early September, we are going to be meeting with the professor and the other two professors, Dr. Foster and Dr. Jacobs, to bring together our IT and our analysts so that we can build exactly how, with our current processes, we can pull that together. Our hope is to have this up and running by October, if not the second week of October. And then we're going to go back and correlate the data that we have to date based on what we have in place today, and then build going forward into the future. As Deputy O'Doherty had intimated earlier, this is going to be a holistic strategy where all of our race-based data is going to be collected throughout the organization. But we will be doing it in sort of an ad hoc form with what we have currently in place, with the intention of having it fully integrated by the beginning of the 2022 year.
Is most of this data already available in the system, like in various systems, and is collected? We just have to kind of bring it together? Or do we actually have to modify the way we're doing policing and the way we're reporting on cases to actually collect new data that we never had before?
So to the first part of your question, Chair, yes, all of the data is available right now in different systems, but we're bound by the ministry reporting structure, which is the legislative requirement. We are going to build an additional data collection set that'll complement what's being done with the ministry.
I appreciate that. We're going above what's our requirement. Deputy Chief, did you have a comment?
Yes, if I could, and thank you through the chair. And Derek, thank you for, I didn't know you paid that much attention during my discussions about data, so congratulations to you. The data generally is available in our current systems and throughout other organizations, such as partnerships in the data monitoring collaboration table, where we can strike agreements to obtain data, not in its traditional form only, but in more contemporary form, like risk data that will assist us in implementing and servicing the community better. But, one of the comments that, I feel is very important to make here is that, innovation and technology can be two different but very similar things. Of course, you don't need technology to be innovative. I've said this before. Part of the innovation that is happening here at PRP is understanding what technologies and what systems we need to capture the appropriate data moving forward so that we can have the proper lens in implementing services here, non-traditional services here that meet those needs. So in short, some of the data sets that we require still have to be defined, the standards still have to be defined, and we have to have the appropriate mechanism and tools to do that. And we are currently implementing those. So we do see at a base level us being able to move forward rather quickly, but from a continuous improvement lens, we are certainly on track to meet the needs of collection of wholesome data by mid-fall to early winter.
Okay, and just my last question on the training side. So I think I know the answer, but I just want to reinforce, as we collect this data and we learn from it, that's supposed to kind of inform our training side. And this is not just a matter of reinforcing what we do today in training, but I assume what we learn is going to actually help us modify the way we do policing, and in order to to deal with these, if the issues we find at their root cause. Is that true? Like, are we gonna, how far is this gonna go from a training and a change perspective?
So thanks again, Chair, for the question. But yes, you're absolutely correct. What we learn from the data will inform modifications that are required to the training. But the most important piece about our training, which hasn't been done previously in other jurisdictions, is we are going to be including an evaluative piece, so that once we impart this knowledge, skills, and abilities to our officers, as it pertains to procedural justice, anti-racism, anti-Black racism training, we're going to measure their performance through a variety of scenarios, virtual reality training, and ways that we can capture what's being done. And the professor, and I'll let him top that up, is going to be intimately involved in helping us with the other experts in building this evaluative piece, because currently that doesn't exist. We have hard measurements when we're doing our traditional use of force training, but by integrating these two and developing a way to measure and evaluate when an officer is performing the right way in de-escalation and engaging a member of the Black community with a trauma-informed approach, we want to capture the best strategies and ways to do that, so that they almost have like a passing mark, an ability so that we can actually see the improvement. So I've spoken quite detailed with Professor on this. I'll see if he has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think you've captured it quite well. From my perspective, it's not enough just to impart information on officers and then let them go out in the field and expect them to deploy that information. Officers have to complete a swim test before they can become officers and show that they can use their firearms and drive, etc. From my perspective, these issues around human rights should be learned and tested in the same way. But importantly, as Superintendent Niles has noted, the fact that data is being collected and will be collected moving forward on a range of outcomes throughout the service will allow the service to determine whether or not what is being taught has been impactful by looking at officer activity and behavior in the field in the future. And so it's not simply testing once training has been conducted, but looking at the data going forward to see whether or not what has been taught has had an impact on outcomes, because ultimately that's what's important, right? It's that the training influence what happens in the community.
Councilman Darris, you had a comment.
Yeah, and thank you through you, Chair. Just to touch on your questions, which I thought were excellent, especially around the training. Maybe, Professor, if you can speak to the importance of making this data public, how powerful or how important it is that the data we're collecting be made public from a transparency perspective and just from community engagement perspective.
Yeah, so I think the word transparency here is key. I think we need to acknowledge that race-based data and the public release of race-based data has both pros and cons. I publish research on race and justice outcomes, and I inevitably find that being used to support, racist theories of criminal behavior that I don't support. And that's always going to be a risk that justice and other agencies, whether it's education and the employment sector, are going to run. But in demonstrating to the public that the service is working to reduce discrimination and racial disparities where those exist, making data public in a well-contextualized fashion, from my perspective, is extremely important.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, just to top up the professor's comments, Councilor Medeiros, I think it's a great question, and also an opportunity to maybe just double back to the concurrent work that the board and service have committed to with the OHRC. Just not to generalize it too much, but out of their 7 key principles, right after data collection is the whole commitment to monitoring and accountability. And I think, the professor is quite right. As we can see, the province has only requested us to report, on a certain set of data sets. We recognize more has to be done, but the use of it, to do the training loop and to modify, and learn behavior changes is one thing. We've also committed to you and the board is on regular monitoring of our data, and to establish a set of robust internal accountability mechanisms at the governance level as well. So reporting back to the board, it'll be inclusive of management and operational reporting, but this is another one of the tenets as part of our ongoing work with you and the board to make sure we present that to you, even if it is above and beyond what the province is asking. So, public for sure, to you and the board as well, which will probably be in a public format, but also internally to help inform our operational decisions. So really, I think where we're headed is using it in the most robust way possible, and looking forward to formatively evaluating that with the experts around us.
So one quick follow-up to Superintendent Niles. This training that you talk about, is it something that only new graduates go through, or is this training that all of our members cycle through, regardless of your seniority and experience? And
Thank you, Chair. Actually, this will become our mandatory integration of use of force with all of the pillars that I spoke about in training that we're doing through our work with OHRC. We have also designed a new training platform that will have officers come through training, and similar to what you came through in our training area. They'll do that twice per year to prevent skill perishability. So what we're doing that's different is we're bringing officers, because we know we need to inculcate new skill sets to make them as conversant and as competent as possible in all of these new parameters. And we're doing that twice per year, and this will be mandatory as for all officers on a go-forward basis.
thank you very much. Okay, so can I have a mover to receive this report? Mr. Chadha, seconded by Mayor Crombie. All in favor? This has been carried. Thank you. Mr. Sherpe, just backtracking for a moment, I think I may have got the vote wrong on the previous motion on the PSB anti-back advisory. Did your team, were they able to count the vote properly?
I think if I saw it correctly, I believe that Councilor Medeiros, Mayor Crombie, and Ron Chadha all supported deferring the motion. And I think that you had stated that that's 4 votes.
Because myself.
You may have included your own vote, but I think 3 or 4 from a because of quorum today, from a procedures perspective would be the same thing.
Okay, so we're okay. Move forward. Okay, thank you. We'll go to item number 8, the request for direct negotiation with acts on public safety. Chief, can you give us a summary of that?
Sure. One clarification, Chair.
Yeah.
Perhaps this would be a good time to thank the professor for having attended. I think.
Sorry, Professor. Thank you for taking time from your vacation to join us. And we look forward to the work you're doing with the service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you for that reminder, Mr. Sherpe. Chief.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll ask Acting Deputy Rob Shearer, who, as you all will know, is now assuming the acting role for Deputy Randy Patrick. And so, Rob, can you just speak to the elements of this? And I believe Anthony can help join in.
Certainly can. Thank you, Chief, and through you, Chair. As you know, conducted energy weapons are one of the most effective tools that officers have for gaining compliance in use of force situations. And presently, all frontline officers are issued with one of these devices. The device currently being deployed is the Axon X2 Taser, which has been in use since 2016. These devices are at the end of their life cycle and warranty period and need to be replaced. Axon Canada is the sole vendor for CEWs in North America, and the latest model on the market is the T7, which offers many technological advances over the X2. Axon's CEW technology also aligns with their digital evidence management system and body-worn camera technologies, which Peel Regional Police are invested in and currently implementing. All of these technologies converge and also align with our real-time operations center, allowing us to best leverage all these technologies to make our officers better equipped, more efficient, and also supports our desire for increased transparency and accountability to the public. Earlier this year, a 10-year capital project was approved for funding for the CEW refresh project in the amount of $7.9 million. However, a subscription plan through Axon would allow us to enter into a 5-year contract for the supply of T7s, offering a cost savings of just over $2 million. Based on this, we're seeking approval to have the contract awarded to Axon Public Safety Canada in the amount of $5.85 million, subject to any top-up that Deputy O'Duarty may have on this issue as well.
Through the chair. No, I don't, Deputy Shearer. Thank you so much.
Any comments from the board? Councilor Medeiros.
Oh, I'm just happy to move it.
Okay, perfect. Can I get a seconder? Okay, but before, did anyone have comments? Okay, seeing none, we're good. All in favor? Thank you. And then Mr. Bowden seconded that, just for the record. Okay, moving to our next item, and thank you, Rob, for that presentation. So the next item is our request for direct negotiation with Heather Clayton Consulting for leadership development and training. Chief, can you give us a summary of this report?
Yes, thank you. And again, I'll ask Deputy Shearer in a second to top up. But as the board will recall, we had a co-presentation between Superintendent Niles. Actually, maybe Dirk can probably speak to it after. But Superintendent Niles and Heather Clayton presented at our last board meeting on the organization's leadership development roadmap and plan for both civilians and sworns throughout the organization. As you know, we believe got to be good on the inside to be good on the outside. It requires an investment that's just beyond obviously tangible and tactical and operational skill sets, but the development of leadership as well. So this budget would allow us to continue with our programming. And Dirk, I'm not sure, I don't want to preclude Rob from speaking to it, but do one of the two of you want to top that up?
I can jump in, Chief. And I know Superintendent Niles would agree. We're completely aligned with your way of thinking on this. Leadership training for our employees is critical and the key to successful organizational and cultural change. Heather Clayton is a consultant, as you all know, in leadership development and has been working with our senior leadership team at Peel Police for just over a year now. And she's been supporting the organization's change vision and helping to maximize the leadership potential that we possess internally. There's a lot more work that could be done, and to ensure that our organization's leadership talent is harnessed from the earliest stages of their employees' career and continues throughout their entire careers. This will ensure that we have a strong foundation of succession planning in place, and that's the direction that Heather Clayton is taking us in collaboration with Dirk's team in corporate learning. Consequently, we're seeking board's approval to award the contract to Heather Clayton in the estimated amount of $250,000. Also to allow the Director of Procurement to increase the contract if the actual costs end up exceeding $250K.
Thank you very much. Just want to remind the board members that we had a presentation either last board meeting, the one before, from Heather and the team on the progress that's been made over the last year. Any comments from the board or questions? Okay, seeing none, can I have someone move this report to receive this report? Mr. Chada, seconder. Mr. Bowden, all in favor? Okay, thank you. That's been carried. Our final agenda item is the body worn camera status report. Deputy Chief Eduardi, can you kindly provide us an update?
Thank you. And through the chair, of course, we are progressing well with the body worn camera project. You will see on the top left-hand corner of the report, the project status indicates we are 83% through the project. I don't want to alarm anybody. It's not that, there will be 100% completion and then the project will drop off. Of course, this is a long-term investment with continuous improvements, provisions, and change management provisions that we will continue to report on. The budget spend is approximately 1/5 of the total budget allotted. That would indicate the 1 year spend over the 5-year period with the contractor or the vendor rather. We do have over now 500 cameras rolled out at our front lines. We're doing that thoughtfully so that our relationship with MAG, ability to provide freedom of information, is done so on a basis in which we can handle and assess and address if we need any additional support. We have virtually trained, we've trained almost all of our frontline officers. We do have some officers that have been off, so we will endeavor to do that over the coming weeks. And that is essentially the update from the last status report.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? Mr. Bowden.
Do we have clarity on the criteria for the BWCs being turned on and off and all that so the public understands how the BWCs are being used?
Yes, through our engagement sessions, we have identified the community's concerns and issues with the cameras being turned on and off through best practices with other agencies across the country that have initially implemented it. Through our own discussions and with the Information Privacy Commission, we've developed those policies that have been incorporated in training. Also, our policies are posted on our PRP website externally for members of the public to be able to view.
Thank you, Deputy.
Deputy Chief, with 500 cameras out there, what is the sense or what is the feedback from the community who have interacted with these cameras? Are there any complaints coming in, or is there feedback from the officers who are wearing them?
Yes, we have actually a thorough social media campaign with the community about the launch of the cameras. We have been tracking the outreach. The reach of the communication has been actually quite impressive. I don't have the exact numbers before the board here today because we have just launched it, but they've been quite impressive. And in fact, the early communication back through social media is a sense of comfort, at least with the body-worn camera project. We know there will be bumps in the road, both with our officers and the community in terms of the initial stages and some initial growing pains. We're working through those from the initial onset, but I would say an overall overarching statement would be it's been a very positive movement so far. You're on mute, Chair.
Deputy Chief Andrews, please go ahead.
I don't have it, through you, Chair. I don't have any statistical support for this, but anecdotally from the frontline officers, the support of the program and the response to the program has been tremendous. The urgency to continue the rollout of the program, from a frontline perspective is there, and the support is there.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie, did you have a comment? Okay. Deputy Chief, I know, you know, our policies are supposed to be kind of live documents that, you know, adapt to the feedback from the community. It'd be interesting, you know, in the future, if there is feedback that comes in that actually, you know, does get our, you know, does result in our policy being changed, you know, to share with us as a board so we can see the impact of how our community's voices are being, you know, considered for in the way we're rolling out. So just a comment. Thank you. Okay, so that's the last item on our agenda. Can I have a mover to receive the report? Councilor Madera, seconded by Mr. Howell. All in favor? Very good. That's been carried. And so this concludes the public portion of the Peel Police Services Board meeting. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes. I think people can have a break, and then we'll move into our in-camera through the link that you have. Thank you, everyone.